I took my son-in-law's damaged phone to get it fixed, thinking it had only fallen on the floor. But the technician who checked it called me aside with a pale face and whispered, "Cancel your cards, change your passwords, and leave your house today." When I asked him what he had seen, he turned the screen towards me, and in that instant, I felt my blood run cold. But before we continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. I woke up at 6:15 in the morning, just like every day. The old clock on the nightstand marked the time with that ticking sound that sometimes blends with the noises of dawn in our quiet suburban neighborhood. Outside, a dog was barking and the delivery truck was passing by, leaving the smell of fresh bread floating down the street. Teresa was already in the kitchen. I heard the sound of boiling water and the aroma of fresh coffee mixed with toast. The old radio we had by the window was murmuring news about a traffic jam downtown. I went over to say good morning, and without looking at me, she said, "The coffee is ready, Richard." While I took the first sip, I looked at the backyard through the window. The sky looked clear, and the air had that warm freshness of early summer. Afterward, I went to the wood shop behind the house, where I spend almost all my time since I retired. I opened the windows. The dust rose, and a ray of sun illuminated the wooden frames I was preparing for St. Michael's Church. At 8 o'clock sharp, I heard the noise of an engine outside a familiar sound. I looked out the door and saw my daughter Sarah's gray sedan pull up in front of the gate. She always arrives without warning with that energy she has had since she was a child. She got out of the car with her purse, and behind her came her husband, Michael, impeccably dressed in a white shirt, leather shoes, and a briefcase in his hand. Teresa welcomed them at the door with a smile, and in a moment, the four of us were in the kitchen with steaming cups of coffee and a plate of donuts between us. Michael spoke with his usual tone, kind and polite. That tone he uses with everyone, but that has never seemed natural to me. "Dad, you saved my life," he said, holding up a phone with a shattered screen. "I dropped it last night, and tomorrow I have a very important video call with the bank. Could you take it to your friend, the technician, the one who fixes everything?" I smiled and nodded. "Of course, son. Charlie still works at his shop a few blocks from here. Don't worry, I will take it to him today." Michael smiled, took out a $50 bill, and left it on the table. "Please accept it. It is for the repair. I don't want you to spend money because of me." "It is not necessary," I replied. "Charlie charges me very little." "I insist," he said with that voice so sure, almost like an order, disguised as courtesy. Sarah intervened, smiling. "Dad, please take it before noon. Michael needs to recover his work contacts." I put the phone in my jacket pocket without thinking much. Before leaving, Michael added, "Oh, Dad, tell the technician to wipe everything before handing it over. There are confidential work things." I nodded yes. I didn't see anything strange. It was a simple favor, like so many one does without imagining what they hide. After they left, Teresa cleared the table and commented almost casually, "Michael has been very busy with the bank lately, hasn't he? He always says he is working on new projects." "Let him be woman," I answered. "Young people live off that now. Projects." I took the keys to my old truck and went out. On the way to Tech Fix Charlie's shop, I stopped by the hardware store to buy varnish for the frames. I greeted the owner, an older man who always has the radio at full volume, and continued on my way. Charlie's shop was the same as always, a small place on the corner, smelling of hot solder, and rock music playing in the background. He was attending to a lady with a broken tablet. He greeted me with a smile. "Hi there, Mr. Richard." I waited, sitting down, glancing at an old newspaper full of ads for quick loans. When I handed him the phone, I explained, "It belongs to my son-in-law. He dropped it last night. He needs it for tomorrow." Charlie examined it carefully, turning it in his hands. "It is not that bad, Mr. Richard. It is just the glass and the battery. I will have it ready for you in an hour and a half." I decided to go eat something in the meantime. I walked to the corner and sat down at a burger joint. I ordered a cheeseburger and an orange juice. It was getting hot, the sun was hitting hard, and the grease sizzled on the grill. I read the news of the day politics football and an article about life insurance fraud. I skipped over it without giving it any importance. About an hour later, my cell phone rang. It was Charlie. "Mr. Richard, could you come back for a moment, please?" His voice sounded strange, as if he were nervous. Something in his tone made me leave my food halfway and return immediately. When I arrived, the shop was closed to the public. Charlie had pulled the metal shutter halfway down. He let me in, locked the bolt, and turned off the music. "What is wrong, Charlie?" I asked him. He swallowed hard, turned on the phone, and told me in a low voice, "I don't know how to tell you this, but you need to see something yourself." He placed the phone on the table and opened a hidden folder among the system files. The name caught my attention, Plan B. Inside were several messages, photos, and screenshots. Charlie explained that when changing the battery, the system made an automatic backup. I saw a strange code. I thought it was an error. But look at this. The silence in the shop became heavy. The only sound was the fan spinning slowly, moving the hot air. I took the phone and read the first lines of a conversation. 2 contacts, one saved as Michael and another with the initial ES. The first message said, "The old man is already confusing his pill schedule. It is a matter of weeks." The second one replied, "Perfect. When he signs the insurance, there will be no turning back." I felt a blow to my chest. My hands trembled. I thought it was a joke, a coincidence, a work conversation. But Charlie was looking at me with a seriousness that left no room for doubt. "Mr. Richard, this is not normal. I shouldn't have read this, but if I appreciate you, it is because of everything you have done for me. Cancel your cards, change your passwords, and don't eat or drink anything that comes from your house without checking. Leave today." I was left speechless. The buzzing of the fan mixed with the sound of blood in my ears. I held the phone tightly, feeling the heat of the newly installed battery. "Are you sure of what you saw?" I asked. "More than I would like to be," he said. I left the shop almost without saying goodbye. Outside, the sky had clouded over. The air smelled of wet earth. The wind was kicking up dust, and the first drops of rain began to fall. I walked a few yards aimlessly with the phone still in my hand. I don't remember how I got to the truck. The only thing I heard were my own footsteps and the echo of those words. "The old man is already confusing his schedules." I sat in the driver's seat, my heart beating fast. In the distance, the bells of St. Michael's Church began to ring slow and deep, as if announcing something more than the arrival of the storm. I started the engine but didn't drive away. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. I thought about Teresa, about Sarah, about the Sunday dinners, the laughter. I thought maybe it was all a misunderstanding, that I should talk to them, ask them. But deep down, something inside me already knew the truth. It was raining hard when I started driving. The drops hit the windshield as if they wanted to erase the thoughts that were chasing me. There was no traffic, only the noise of the engine and my ragged breathing. That morning, which began with the aroma of fresh coffee, became, without my knowing it, the beginning of the longest and darkest day of my life. I returned home, trying to keep my face from betraying the trembling I felt inside. I opened the gate to the workshop, and the metallic sound seemed louder than ever. I left the phone on the work table next to the wood shavings and the jar of varnish that still smelled of pine. Teresa was in the kitchen mopping the floor. "Did Charlie fix it?" she asked me without looking up. "Yes, more or less," I said, pretending everything was the same. She nodded and continued her work, humming a song from the radio, softly. When she went up to the laundry room, I was left alone. I closed the workshop door and lowered the blinds so no one could see from the street. I took a deep breath, turned on the desk lamp, and opened the phone again. My hands were sweating. I navigated through the menus until I found the Plan B folder again. I felt a chill when it appeared on the screen. It was not a coincidence. No one with a normal life has something like this, hidden. I connected the USB cable to the old workshop computer and began copying all the content. The sound of the file transferring seemed eternal. While I waited, I opened the messaging app. There were hundreds. Conversations between Michael and Sarah, the 2 names I least wanted to see in that context. I read slowly with my eyes clouded by the reflection of the screen. We have to do it in a controlled way. Dr. Evans has already accepted adding the note. When he signs the insurance, everything will be legal. Dad won't suffer. He will just sleep. I put a hand to my chest. My breathing felt heavy. He will just sleep. It was the phrase that hurt me the most, as if every word took a year off my life. I kept reading. There was an attached photo, a life insurance policy with my name, my ID number, and a signature that wasn't mine, although it looked like it. In small letters, the beneficiary, Michael Reynolds. I turned off the screen and stood still for a few seconds. The silence was so thick I could hear the ticking of the dining room clock across the hall. I couldn't understand it. My daughter, my own blood, speaking of me as if I were already dead. I finished transferring the files to the USB drive. Then I opened the workshop printer and started printing everything, the screenshots, the messages, the documents. Every sheet that came out was a blow to the heart. When I finished, I put the copies in an old folder of wood blueprints and hid it in the drawer where I keep my precision tools. Teresa came down shortly after. "What are you doing still in there?" she said from the door. "Nothing. I am just organizing my papers. Later, I want us to go to the bank. There's something strange with the accounts." "Strange how?" she asked. "I will explain later. Don't worry now." She looked at me with curiosity but didn't insist. I waited for her to go to the market and took the opportunity to leave as well. I drove to a small cafe on the corner, the one with free Wi-Fi. I ordered a double Americano and sat by the window. I turned on my laptop and sent the files to my secondary email. Then I uploaded them to a password-protected cloud. I did every step with a precision I didn't recognize in myself. My fingers were trembling, but I knew that if I didn't secure everything, I could lose it. Next to me, 2 men were talking about business. One of them mentioned something that made me break out in a cold sweat. "Did you hear about the insurance fraud in the next town over? They say it was a family member who did it all." "Yes, it is always someone from the family," the other replied, laughing. I lowered my head. It was as if the conversation was directed at me. I felt my heart hammering against my chest. I finished my coffee in one gulp and left, looking sideways by instinct. When I arrived home, I saw Michael's car parked in front of the garden. The smell of damp earth filled the air. He had just watered the plants. He had a hose in his hand and was whistling a tune. Upon seeing me, he looked up and smiled as if nothing were wrong. "Dad, I was just passing by." "Were you able to fix the phone?" "Yes," I said, trying to make my voice sound firm. "Here you go." I handed him the device. He turned it on, checked it for a few seconds, then patted me on the shoulder. "Perfect. Thank you very much. Tomorrow we will come by with Sarah to invite you to dinner. We have good news." Good news. That phrase echoed in my head. I watched him get into his car, turn on the radio, and sing at full volume as he drove away. I stood still, watching the car disappear at the end of the street. I had the feeling that I had just handed over something more than a phone, as if I had returned a bomb to him. I went into the house and asked Teresa to close all the windows. "Is it going to rain again?" she asked. "I don't know, but better to keep everything closed." She didn't say anything, although her gaze followed me for a moment. I went up to the workshop and took out an old notebook. I started writing down every detail, every time, every phrase. Day 1, discovery. Day 2, appointment with Dr. Evans. Day 3, possible meeting with bank. I wanted to leave a record. If something happened to me, someone had to understand what had occurred. I picked up the phone and called Dr. Evans' office. His assistant answered. "Could you see me tomorrow morning?" "It is urgent," I told her. "The doctor has an opening at 8:30, she replied. "Perfect. I will be there." I hung up and breathed a sigh of relief. At least I had a starting point. That night, the storm returned. Heavy rain with thunder that made the windows vibrate. The lights flickered. Teresa made hot soup and tried to turn on the television, but the signal came and went. At 11, while she was folding clothes in the bedroom, I heard the buzzing of the landline on the kitchen table. It was vibrating non-stop. I walked over. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated. I didn't want to hear her voice, not yet. I let it ring. The answering machine recorded a few seconds of silence, and then a low, trembling tone. "Dad, are you awake? Michael wants to see you tomorrow. There is something important to sign. Call me, please." The recording ended. I felt a chill. I stood looking at the reflection of my face in the window, old tired with eyes full of questions. A bolt of lightning illuminated the street, and for an instant I saw my own shadow on the glass, as if looking at me from another time. I turned off the light, opened the workshop drawer, and took out the small USB drive. I put it in a metal toolbox, the ones I have had since the 70s, and with a red marker I wrote on the lid, "Evidence do not erase." Outside, the wind made the branches of the orange tree in the patio creak. Teresa was already asleep, unaware of everything. I sat in the dark, listening to the patter of rain on the tin roof. The clock struck 12:03. I thought about Sarah's message. Michael's voice, the forged signatures, the medications, everything fit with a sick precision. I ran a hand over my face and in a low voice, barely audible, murmured to myself, "If I go to the bank tomorrow, I won't come out alive." The thunder that struck afterwards made the whole house shake, as if the sky confirmed my thought. I stayed there motionless with the box in my hands, waiting for dawn, knowing that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. I woke up at 6:20. Outside it was still raining with that calm after the storm, when the drops seemed to fall, only to remind you that the day before something changed forever. Teresa was already in the kitchen making coffee. The aroma of brown sugar and cinnamon filled the house, but today didn't comfort me, like other times. While I put on my jacket, I put the small USB drive in my inside pocket. I couldn't leave it at home. It was the only thing protecting me if something happened. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror. The dark circles were deep, my eyes red, as if I had aged 10 years in one night. I left without breakfast. Upon opening the gate, I saw something that froze my blood. Michael's truck was parked half a block away, turned off, with the windshield fogged up and a faint column of smoke coming out of the exhaust. No one was moving inside, but I knew it was him. I pretended not to see him. I closed the gate and took another route, taking a long detour to exit onto Main Street. The sky was gray. The tires splashed dirty water in the puddles, and every red light seemed like a trap. I arrived at Dr. Evans' office at 7:45. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Richard. The doctor is finishing a procedure. He will see you in a few minutes." I thanked her and sat in the waiting room. There was a table with old magazines, one of them open right to a page that spoke of financial crimes within the family. I ran my finger over the headline without reading the whole thing. It gave me chills. At 8:40, Dr. Evans came out still in his lab coat. "Mr. Richard, come in, please." I entered, closed the door, and sat in front of him. I didn't waste time. "Doctor, I need to see my medical history," I told him bluntly. He looked at me surprised. "Is something wrong?" "Just print it, please." "Everything." The man sighed, turned on the computer, and typed for a minute. The printer began to spit out sheets. He handed them to me. I read the first one, and my stomach turned. The patient shows symptoms of disorientation and mild memory loss. Requires monitoring. I left the paper on the table with a dry slap. "Who asked you to write this?" I asked, staring at him. He stayed silent for a few seconds. His hand played with his pen. Finally, he muttered, "It was Michael. He said he needed a medical certificate for a family health insurance plan." I felt everything click into place. I looked at him, and in my voice there was no longer doubt, only weariness. "So, doctor, you are going to print a new report, a real one. I want it to say that I am completely lucid and in good mental state. You are going to sign it right now." The man lowered his gaze. "Mr. Richard, I am sorry. I didn't know it was for something bad." "Then do it," I replied. It took a moment. The printer sounded again. This time the report was short and clear. "The patient is lucid, oriented, and without signs of cognitive deterioration. He signed, stamped, and handed me the envelope. His hand was trembling. I put it in my jacket. Thank you, doctor. And I advise you that if Michael comes looking for you again, say you don't know anything. I left without giving him time to respond. The air in the street smelled of humidity and gasoline. I walked to the parking lot. Upon arrival, I saw him. Michael was there next to my car, pretending to talk on the phone. When he saw me, he smiled. "Dad!" "What a coincidence. I came to drop off some papers at the lab," he said with that voice of his so calculated. "Ah, I didn't know you worked with Dr. Evans," I replied, closing the car door. He laughed, scratched his neck. "No, I just asked him some routine things. You know how this insurance thing is." I nodded without saying more and got into the car. I watched him in the rearview mirror. He was still there, motionless, with that smile that slowly faded as I drove away. I drove to the nearest post office. At the counter, I asked for a sturdy envelope and sent the copy of the medical report to lawyer Jessica Pearson. I paid for express shipping and stared at the receipt until the clerk told me, "Do you want the tracking number?" "Yes, keep it safe. It is important." Afterward, I drove to the National Bank on Mexico Avenue. The manager, Steve, a kind man I have known for years, received me. "Mr. Richard, what a pleasure to see you. Your son-in-law came yesterday to update some permissions." "Permissions?" I asked, feeling a hole in my stomach. "Yes, an extension of your card and online access. He said you had authorized it. I noticed my fingers were trembling. And did I sign anything?" "Yes, of course we have a digital copy." The man turned the screen and showed me the document. The signature was mine, or almost. A perfect imitation. "That is not my signature," I said, clenching my teeth. Steve frowned. I imagined. "This happens more than you think, Mr. Richard. We are going to cancel everything right now." It took 15 minutes to block the accounts, issue a new card, and change the passwords. He made me sign 3 different forms, this time in front of him. When I left the bank, the rain had returned. I got into the car and closed my eyes for a moment. Everything was clear. They were not suspicions. They were facts. Michael was preparing every step with surgical precision. The doctor, the insurance, the bank. Everything. I returned home with cold hands and a burning chest. Teresa was preparing noodle soup in the kitchen. "Do you want to eat something?" she asked, without noticing my face. I nodded and sat down. I ate slowly, without tasting anything. While she washed the dishes, I told her calmly, "This afternoon, Sarah and Michael are coming over." "Again?" "They came 2 days ago. They said they have good news." She smiled. "Surely it is something about work." "Sarah told me they were planning a trip." I didn't answer. I just looked out the window. The sky was clearing little by little, and the drops on the glass seemed to shine like broken mirrors. At 5 o'clock, sharp, they arrived. Sarah brought a cake box and Michael a bottle of red wine. They entered laughing, talking fast. "Dad!" "Mom!" he said. "We want to celebrate that Sarah got a promotion." Teresa was happy. She served them soup and hot tortillas. At the table, everything seemed normal, but I felt a knot in my stomach. Michael opened the bottle with a corkscrew. The dry sound of the cork coming out made me shudder. He poured 4 glasses. The wine had a dark color, almost black. He passed me a glass and raised his. "Let's toast," he said, "to family and new beginnings." I raised mine, but only brought my lips close and faked a sip. "I can't drink much," I lied. "I am on blood pressure medication." Michael looked at me fixedly for a few seconds with a frozen smile. "Did you already visit Dr. Evans?" he asked, swirling the wine in his glass. "Did he tell me he would do some memory tests?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "And how did it turn out?" he insisted. "Perfect." More lucid than ever. His smile twisted barely, but he returned to his polite tone. "That is good, Dad. Sometimes one worries about the elderly, you know." Sarah looked at him strangely, as if she didn't understand why he said that. We finished dinner. They talked about trips, about work, about a future that to me already sounded like a well-rehearsed lie. When they left, Teresa began to clear the plates. On the table remained the glasses. Mine, almost intact, had a slight stain on the rim. She took it and said, Why didn't you drink anything? The wine was good. I looked her in the eyes. Why did I know I shouldn't do it? I didn't say more. That night the rain began to fall again. The drops pattered against the roof, slow, monotonous. In the kitchen, the bottle of wine they brought was still on the shelf, barely open with the cork half in. I turned off the lights and stood observing the shadow of the bottle projected on the wall. It looked like a human figure leaning over watching. I went up to the workshop, opened my notebook, and wrote, Day 3, confirmation. Failed attempt. Do not lower guard. I put the USB back in my pocket and looked out the window. On the street, a car passed slowly, its headlights illuminating the gate for an instant. I closed the curtains. Poison doesn't always kill at once. Sometimes it disguises itself as love, as a family dinner, as a sincere toast. And when you realize it, it is already in your blood, waiting for its moment. That night, I understood that mine was already circulating, but not in the body, but in the soul. Dawn broke with a gray sky covered with low clouds that seemed not to want to move. I woke up before sunrise with that feeling of alert that hadn't let me sleep for days. On the workshop table where I normally cut wood and sanded frames, I now had my papers spread out, printed copies of the messages Dr. Evans' report, the bank statements, and the insurance policy with my forged signature. Everything was there ordered in silence like the pieces of a puzzle showing a single image, my planned death. I checked them one by one, making sure nothing was missing. Afterward, I put them in a large brown envelope, and with a black marker, I wrote on the cover, In case of emergency, deliver to Jessica Pearson. Teresa got up shortly after. She found me standing putting the papers in the workshop briefcase. Why are you keeping so many things? She asked, with that mixture of curiosity and tenderness she had always had. Just a precaution, I replied, without looking directly at her. I couldn't tell her the truth yet. If I did, I would put her in danger. I went out in the truck and drove to the post office downtown. The clerk recognized me. Important letter, Mr. Richard? Yes, I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. Urgent delivery, please. He stamped the envelope and slid it into the metal mailbox. That dry sound, the thud of the cardboard against the bottom, made me feel a kind of relief. It was as if part of my fear remained locked in there. On the way home, the rain started again. At the height of Highland Avenue, I noticed something strange, a black SUV behind me at a constant distance. I passed a traffic light, another, it was still there. I turned at the next corner, the car too. My breathing accelerated. I sped up a little and turned sharply towards a gas station. I stopped next to the pump. The SUV went straight without stopping. I watched it move away until it was lost in the mist. I stayed still for a minute with my hands on the wheel. It was evident they were already watching me. Upon returning home, Teresa was sweeping the hallway. Sarah called, she told me. Do they want us to go to lunch on Sunday at their house? Michael is going to make a barbecue. That is fine, I answered. We will go. She smiled happy with the idea. I, on the other hand, could only think of Charlie's warning. The messages, the bottle of wine that was still in our kitchen. That afternoon I locked myself in the workshop. I pretended to work, but in reality I was writing my own diary. I detailed everything, the dates, the places, the names. I titled the first page, Record of the Dark Days. At 3 p.m, the phone rang. It was Michael. Dad, he said with an animated tone, is everything okay? Were you able to resolve the bank thing? Yes, everything is in order now, I replied, measuring every word. Perfect, he replied. Then tomorrow I will show you some new papers to sign, something about the supplementary insurance. I squeezed the phone tightly. Agreed, Michael, I said simply. I hung up without saying goodbye. I knew that his every word had a hidden intention. That night, I told Teresa that I needed to buy some things downtown. I walked to a small electronics store near the market. In the display case between cables and adapters, I saw what I was looking for, a spy camera in the shape of a pen. I asked the seller if it recorded audio and video. Yes, sir. It has a 32 gigabyte card and activates with this small button he showed me. You just have to charge it for 2 hours. I paid in cash and put it in my pocket. Back home, I sat in the workshop to test it. I recorded a couple of seconds of my voice, then played it back. It sounded clear. Perfect. I learned to use it without looking. I kept it in the inside pocket of a shirt, like someone hiding an invisible weapon. The next day early, Charlie called me. "Did they give you back the phone, Mr. Richard?" "Yes," I replied. "My son-in-law already has it." "Be careful. Those messages you found delete themselves after 72 hours. If you didn't save them, they will disappear." I hung up and went straight to the workshop. I turned on the computer and copied everything again, this time onto the old hard drive I used for carpentry designs. I labeled it with masking tape St. Michael Project, a name no one would suspect. That night, while we were having dinner, the phone vibrated on the table. It was a video call from Sarah. I answered it. She was smiling, and next to her was Michael, with that calculated calm. "Dad, don't miss this Sunday. We have something important to announce." "Of course, daughter," I told her, forcing a smile. "I will be there." Before hanging up, my eyes drifted to the background of the image on her kitchen counter. There was a bottle of wine, just like the one they had brought me the last time. Sunday arrived cloudy with that heavy air that precedes storms. Teresa got ready early. I checked the spy pen for the last time. It had a full battery. I turned it on and put it in my shirt pocket. We left at 11. The drive to Sarah's house was silent. In the passenger seat, Teresa looked out the window, unaware of everything. Upon arrival, Sarah received us with hugs and the smell of roast meat. The patio was decorated with paper garlands and a long table with salads, wine and a pitcher of hibiscus water. Everything seemed like any other Sunday. Michael came out of the kitchen with a black apron and a rehearsed smile. "Mom! Dad!" he said. "What a pleasure to see you. Today we have to celebrate." He put the bottle of wine on the table and opened it. The cork popped with a click. He poured 2 glasses and offered me one. "Let's toast, Dad, to family and new beginnings." I raised the glass, brought it barely to my lips, but didn't drink. In my pocket, the pen was recording every word. Michael drank a long gulp. Then he left the glass on the table and turned to get the carving knife. In that instant, I discreetly switched his glass for mine. "Teresa," I told her, "drink only juice. The wine is very strong." She nodded, suspecting nothing. During lunch, they talked about trips, about a new house they wanted to buy. I responded with short sentences. I observed every gesture, every movement of Michael. He didn't drink more wine. He limited himself to moving the meat on the grill and looking sideways at my empty glass. At 2 in the afternoon, I said I felt tired and needed to rest. Sarah protested a little, but agreed. "Rest, Dad. I will call you later." We said goodbye. I walked to the truck with Teresa. Upon starting the engine, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw Michael on the terrace collecting the plates. Then, without anyone noticing, he emptied the rest of the wine down the drain. His face changed. He was no longer smiling. He had his lips pressed tight and a lost look. That gesture was enough. I didn't need more proof. The way back was long. Teresa dozed beside me. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, feeling the adrenaline rush through my body. I had survived a deadly toast. As soon as we arrived, I called lawyer Jessica Pearson. I told her everything from the wine to Michael's look at the end. "Calm down, Mr. Richard," she told me with a firm voice. "I expect you in my office tomorrow morning. We are going to file a formal complaint. Bring all the evidence." "I will be there," I replied. I hung up and stood in silence. That night the workshop smelled of dampness and old wood. I took the pen out of my pocket, connected it to the computer, and played the recording. Michael's voice sounded clear, unmistakable. With this, we signed the end of everything. I paused the audio. My hands were trembling. I put it in a metal box next to the USB, locked it, and hid it behind the wardrobe. Outside, the neighborhood dogs barked nonstop. The rain returned soft but constant, as if wanting to clean something that couldn't be cleaned. I sat by the window. I looked at the reflection of my face, that of a man who no longer had fear, only determination. I knew then that from that night on, I had crossed an invisible line. I was no longer the man waiting for justice, but the one preparing to provoke it, and I would do it in silence. Dawn broke with the mist clinging to the large glass windows. I woke up at 6:10 before the alarm went off. The silence was thick, as if the air itself knew that this day would not be like the others. I poured myself a cup of coffee and dialed Jessica Pearson's number, the lawyer. She answered immediately with that paused voice that always conveys security. "Mr. Richard, come at 9:30. I will bring Detective Miller." I hung up and looked at the workshop table. On top, I had everything organized, the photographs of the messages, the corrected report from Dr. Evans, the copies from the bank, the USB drive, the spy pen. I put them one by one into a folder, making sure not to leave any traces of disorder. Teresa came down still in her robe with her hair tied back. She observed me in silence for a moment before speaking. "Why are you taking so many things?" she asked. "Just a precaution," I answered. She didn't insist. She prepared an egg sandwich and wrapped it in a napkin. Before giving it to me, she took my hand. "Take care, old man. Don't trust anyone," she whispered. I nodded and left without answering. The morning was cold. The wet pavement reflected the streetlights. I drove downtown and parked in front of the glass building that shone under the gray sky, the glass tower. I went up to the 5th floor. In the reception, they recognized me. A young woman offered me coffee and showed me to the room. Jessica was waiting for me there in a navy blue suit, her hair tied back and her glasses resting on some documents. Next to her was a man of about 50, burly, with a serious face and a gaze that didn't move from me for a second. "Mr. Richard, this is Detective Roy Miller," Jessica said. "He will be in charge of coordinating the investigation." We shook hands. He had a firm grip, almost military. "Sit down, please," he indicated. I started speaking from the beginning. The phone, the messages, the medical report, the bank, the food, the wine. I told everything without embellishments. Every word weighed in my throat. Miller took quick notes in a black notebook with precise strokes. "Did your son-in-law know you had those documents?" he asked at one point. "No, not yet," I replied. Jessica watched me in silence, evaluating every gesture. When I finished, I handed her the USB drive and the pen. She connected them to her computer. Miller leaned in to listen to the audio. Michael's voice sounded clear, that phrase I had recorded at lunch. "With this, we sign the end of everything." The detective looked up. His face had changed. "This is grave," he said with a low tone. "But very grave. We are going to act." Jessica printed 2 copies of the complaint document. She passed them to me to sign. I did it without hesitation. My hands trembled a little, but my decision was firm. Mr. Richard, Jessica intervened. "I recommend that you leave your house for a few days. We need time to install a surveillance system without raising suspicions." "That is fine," I replied. "I will do whatever is necessary." Miller stood up. "This afternoon I will send 2 agents. They will look like maintenance technicians. No one will know who they are. Do not comment on anything with your family, not even with your daughter." Jessica walked me to the door. Before letting me go, she took my hand tightly. "Do not eat or drink anything prepared by your son-in-law again. Not even a coffee. Promise me." "I promise." I went down the elevator with my heart racing. Upon leaving to the parking lot, I noticed a man leaning against a column, with a gray shirt and a phone in his hand. He pretended to look at messages, but was pointing towards my car. As soon as I observed him, he lowered his head and walked quickly to a black sedan that took off without waiting for the traffic light. I wrote down the license plate on a piece of paper. The drive back was tense. Every car behind me seemed suspicious. Upon arriving home, Teresa was waiting for me at the door. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt me a single time. When I finished, she went to the bedroom, took out a small suitcase, and started packing clothes, medicines, and documents. "We are leaving tonight," she said without looking at me. "I don't want to sleep here one more day." I nodded. At 6 in the afternoon, a white van pulled up in front of the house. 2 men dressed in civilian clothes got out with backpacks and a toolbox. "Good afternoon, we are the technicians for the cooling system," said one with a slight smile. I knew they were Miller's agents. I let them in. They moved with discretion. One checked the kitchen, another the hallway. In less than an hour, they had installed 4 tiny cameras. One in the living room, another in the kitchen, another in the corridor, and the last one near the gate. Each camera transmits live to the station, one of them explained to me. No one will be able to detect them, not even if they check the network. I signed the act they showed me on a tablet. I thanked them and they left in silence. When I closed the door, the house seemed different, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. Teresa was sitting on the sofa, with her hands clasped on her lap. "And now what?" she asked. "Now we wait," I said. I turned off the lights in the workshop, put Jessica's envelope in the deepest drawer of the closet, and locked everything. Before leaving, I took a photograph of the garden, the lined-up pots, the small statue of the Virgin, the brown iron gate. I wanted to keep that memory in case I never returned. We called a taxi and left the house without looking back. The Hotel St. Charles was 10 minutes from downtown. I asked for a room under the false name Jessica had suggested, Richard Mendez. The receptionist asked no questions. The room was small, with beige curtains and the smell of disinfectant. Teresa left the suitcase in a corner and sat on the bed. "I never thought we would come to this," she whispered. "Me neither," I said, but there is no turning back now. I turned on the television just to break the silence. A newscast spoke of a bank fraud in the state. I changed the channel. I didn't want to hear more about deception. Outside, the rain was falling again. The sound of water crashing against the windows mixed with the distant noise of traffic. At 10, I turned off the light. Teresa fell asleep soon, exhausted by the tension. I couldn't close my eyes. I watched the red dot of the television off blinking and thought about the cameras they had installed in my house, watching an empty stage. At 5 to 1, the phone vibrated on the table. I picked it up. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, but I opened it. "Where are you, Dad?" Sarah's worried. I stared at the screen for several seconds. The text glowed faintly under the blue light. I didn't answer. I turned off the phone, took out the SIM card, and left it inside the nightstand drawer. The fear was no longer just for what they could do to me, but for what could be discovered. In that cheap hotel silence, I understood that my previous life, that of the trusting father, the quiet carpenter, the man who believed in his family, had ended. That night, I didn't sleep. I looked through the fogged window where the car lights seemed like ghosts sliding down the avenue. Outside, the world went on, but inside me something had stopped. Fear, that word I heard so many times in the mouths of others, finally had a shape, the shape of an unanswered message. That morning I woke up at 8:15 with the sound of fine rain hitting the hotel blinds. Teresa was still sleeping, wrapped in the blanket, her breathing slow, unaware of the trembling that ran through my body. I turned on the room's coffee maker and waited. The smell of coffee filled the air, but it didn't calm me. I knew that today something was going to end. A few minutes later, my laptop rang. On the screen appeared the name of Detective Miller. I answered immediately. "Mr. Richard, we have everything ready," his firm voice said. "If your son-in-law appears, we will record him." He explained that they had installed the remote link so I could see the cameras in real time from the laptop. He sent me a protected link and a password. I turned on the computer, opened the browser, and there it was, the image of my house, empty, illuminated by the morning light. The clock in the corner marked 9:02. "Do not do anything," Miller warned me. "Observe, take notes, and wait for my call." I nodded, although he couldn't see me. For more than 2 hours, the house remained motionless. The wind moved the curtains. A ray of sun slipped through the dining room window. At 11:47, something changed. The sound of an engine was heard through the patio microphone. In the screen, a gray car stopped in front of the gate. I recognized it instantly, Michael's sedan. I felt a dry cold run down my back. Michael got out of the car with a sure step. He was wearing a light blue shirt and a silver watch that shone with every movement. He stopped for a moment, looked around, and took out a bunch of keys. He has a copy, I murmured to myself. With all naturalness, he opened the front door and crossed the garden. The cameras captured his face clearly. In the living room, he looked at the walls, as if making sure no one else was there. Then he walked to the kitchen and took out 2 white bags from his jacket pocket. The microphone registered every noise, the slight crunch of the plastic, the sound of the bottles moving. He put one of the bags on the table, opened the medicine cabinet, and took out the box of my blood pressure pills. The camera from the upper angle captured his hands. With a small spoon, he poured a fine white powder inside the bottle. "There it is," whispered Miller over the phone. "Don't touch anything. Mr. Richard, don't say anything." I clenched my fists. My nails hurt embedded in my skin. Seeing him do it with such calm as if he were making coffee was more painful than any blow. Then he took the second bag and went to the shelf, where the bottle of red wine remained the same one he had brought weeks ago. He uncorked it, looked around, and poured a little of the powder into the neck of the bottle. He shook it gently, smiled, and placed it back in the same spot. Then he cleaned the surface with a rag, erasing his fingerprints meticulously. It was a learned ritual, not improvised. He went up the stairs. The hallway camera followed him. He opened the door to my bedroom and began to search the drawers. In one of them he found a brown envelope. He held it for a moment, opened it, and checked it. I recognized it. It was the fake envelope, the one I had left on purpose with blank sheets. When he realized, his expression changed. He frowned and threw the envelope to the floor with rage. He kicked the drawer, cursed between his teeth. Then, approaching the balcony, he took out his phone and dialed a number. His voice, clear and without trembling, came through the microphones. "Yes, everything ready. This time, it won't fail." The detective gave the immediate order from the other side of the link. "We are going in. Nobody move." On the monitor, 2 men dressed in civilian clothes crossed the back gate. The first one wore an earpiece, the second a black folder. In silence, they advanced through the side hallway. In that instant, Michael was coming down the stairs with a bottle in his hand. He was pouring himself a glass of wine when the kitchen door opened. "Police! Don't move!" one of the agents shouted, showing the badge. Michael was startled. The wine spilled on his shirt. The bottle broke against the floor. He tried to run towards the living room, but slipped on the glass shards. The agents surrounded him in seconds. One pushed him against the wall, and the other held his hands. "You don't know who you are messing with," he shouted, trying to break free. Detective Miller, already inside the house, entered through the main gate. His voice was firm, cutting. "Michael Reynolds, you are under arrest for attempted homicide, forgery of documents, and fraud." Michael stood motionless, breathing hard. The living room camera focused on him from the front. His face contracted, sweat falling down his temple, the empty look of someone who knows it is all over. The agent searched his jacket and found the rest of the white powder, the bag he had used, and the phone still recording a call. Miller held up the envelope and showed it to the camera. "Everything is recorded," he said. "Jessica called me by video call. Her face appeared small in the corner of the screen, her voice contained, but victorious. We have him. Mr. Richard, everything is recorded. The evidence is irrefutable." I didn't answer. I stood looking at the image of Michael handcuffed, with his eyes down his shoes, stained with wine and blood from the glass. Teresa, sitting next to me in the hotel room, put her hand to her mouth. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and rested her hand on my shoulder. For several minutes the image remained fixed, the living room of our house full of police officers, the light entering through the windows, the pieces of bottles shining like pieces of a broken mirror. I took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, I felt I could do it without fear. I turned off the computer. The reflection of the black screen showed my tired face with wrinkles I didn't remember having. I stayed there in silence while outside the cars kept passing indifferent. Teresa took my hand. "It is over," she murmured. "No, not yet," I replied. "The worst part is not what he did. The worst part is having seen him do it." She squeezed my hand without saying anything. Outside, the sky was opening up. The sun's rays entered through the glass, warm, almost painful in their clarity. On the street, the distant sound of the siren merged with the traffic noise. The city followed its course, oblivious to what had happened in one more house in any corner of the suburbs. But for me, time stopped. I felt that a part of my life, that of the father who trusted that, of the man who still believed in his own, had ended with that final click of the handcuffs closing over my son-in-law's wrists. I closed my eyes and heard my own heart beating slowly heavy. "Teresa," I whispered, "and now what are we going to do?" I didn't know how to answer her. I just looked towards the window where the light filtered through the curtains, and thought that justice, when it arrives, doesn't sound like one expects. There is no music or redemption, only an absolute dense silence that settles in the soul. I looked down at the turned-off computer. In the dark screen, the last frozen image was still reflected Michael, with his head bowed the floor, covered with glass fragments and spilled wine. I sighed and closed the laptop. Outside, the city woke up with its usual noise, the horns, the street vendors, the shouts of children leaving school. Everything remained the same. But inside me, something had changed forever. The cameras turned off, and with them the echo of everything that was once my family. The dawn after the arrest was different. There was no noise of birds or smell of fresh coffee, only a strange silence, as if the world were holding its breath. At 7:05 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "Mr. Richard, the journalists are already in front of the station," she said with a serious tone. "Do not come now. Wait for my call." I looked at Teresa, who was still sleeping, and approached the window. From the 7th floor of the hotel, I could see the cars passing slowly under a light drizzle. Everything seemed normal, but I knew my life was no longer so. I turned on the television. On the local news channel, a headline appeared in red letters: "Man arrested for attempted poisoning, exclusive video." The presenter spoke fast, almost with morbidity. On screen, they showed a fragment of the recording, the camera, in my living room. Michael holding the white bag, the kitchen table behind. The reporter emphasized every word as if it were a movie. The images were handed over to the authorities by the father-in-law of Michael Reynolds. Himself, he was saying. It is presumed that the detainee attempted to poison him with an unknown compound. Teresa woke up startled upon hearing his name. "Is it already on the news?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, "and this is just beginning." I poured myself coffee and took paper and pen. I wrote a short list: call the bank, call Dr. Evans, meeting with Jessica at 10. Underneath I wrote in large letters, "Do not speak to press." I stuck it on the table as a reminder that sometimes silence also saves. At 9:15, Jessica arrived at the hotel. She was wearing a black coat, had her hair tied back, and a thick folder in her arm. She greeted me with a quick gesture without smiling. "I bring the summary of the investigation," she said, handing me some documents. "Here is the arrest warrant and the police file. Everything ready to formalize the complaint." We went down to the lobby and called a taxi. On the street, the camera flashes greeted us before even opening the door. The journalist shouted, "Mr. Richard, is it true that your son-in-law wanted to kill you? How do you feel?" "What do you plan to do now?" Jessica pushed me gently towards the car. "Don't answer anything," she whispered. "They are not looking for the truth, they are looking for headlines." The taxi advanced through the chaos. In front of the station, a dozen reporters waited behind the barriers, microphones and cameras pointing at the entrance. Inside, the air smelled of paper and disinfectant. At the reception, an officer handed us a form to sign. "We need your official statement, Mr. Richard," he said. My hand trembled a little when stamping the signature. The ink was still fresh when Detective Miller appeared. "This way, please," he indicated. He led me to a small room with gray walls, a wooden table, and a fluorescent lamp hanging from the ceiling. In the corner, a camera recorded every movement. The interrogation began calmly. A young officer asked me to relate the facts, in order how I knew about the messages, when I discovered the manipulation of the medicines, when I saw Michael for the last time. I answered with short sentences without drama. Did he have access to the house keys? He asked. Yes. My daughter gave him a copy months ago. Did you ever confront him? No. I didn't want him to know that I knew. The detective nodded, taking notes. Then he put a small player on the table. He pressed play. My recording of the lunch was heard Michael's voice. With this we signed the end of everything. The sound made my skin crawl. In the room no one spoke for several seconds. Do you wish to witness a confrontation with the detainee? Miller finally asked. If it is necessary, yes, I replied. He closed his notebook and sealed the envelope with the evidence. We will contact you if the district attorney authorizes it. For now, he is under protection. I left the room with a mixture of relief and emptiness. In the hallway, the metal doors echoed when closing. Upon crossing the lobby, a journalist saw me and began to run towards me. Mr. Richard, one word. Are you sure your son-in-law tried to poison you? I didn't answer. I kept walking with my gaze fixed ahead, while the flashes blinded me for an instant. In the taxi back to the hotel, Teresa was waiting for me in the room with the television on. Everyone already knows, she said without taking her eyes off the screen. The phone started vibrating calls from the bank, from a local radio program, even from an unknown number that insisted non-stop. I wrote a short message to Jessica. I am not speaking. In the afternoon, the police summoned me to the general hospital to perform forensic tests. An agent escorted me through the cold corridors of the laboratory. The white lights reflected off the floor like a mirror. A nurse asked me to sit down. They drew blood, cut a lock of hair, and scraped a sample from my nails. Each vial was sealed with red tape, and my name written in firm handwriting. Sign here, please, said the technician, showing me the act. I signed 1, 2, 3 times. Each stroke felt like a wound closed by force. Jessica arrived a few minutes later. The DA ordered a complete analysis of toxic substances. Tomorrow we will have preliminary results. And Michael? I asked. In isolation, he is declaring with his lawyer. Back at the hotel, the sky began to darken. In front of the entrance, there was a white car with 2 men inside. They said they were temporary security sent by the police. They smiled at me, but their gazes were too cold. I wrote down the license plate on a paper just in case. That night, Teresa prepared tea in silence. At 10:30, the room's landline rang. No one uses those devices anymore, I thought. I answered. Dad, it was Sarah's voice, broken by crying. I knew nothing. I swear to you. Michael told me it was for your own good, that everything was under control. I felt a knot in my throat, but I didn't answer immediately. Teresa looked at me from the bed with red eyes. Dad, please tell me something, she pleaded. I left the receiver on the table. My daughter's voice continued to be heard for a moment until Teresa took it and hung up slowly. You are not ready to listen to her, she said. Nor is she ready to tell me the truth, I answered. I turned off the light and stared at the window. Outside, the city lights twinkled like small open wounds. On the phone, notifications kept arriving. Someone had published the images of the arrest on social networks. I opened one of them. There were hundreds of comments. Some defended Michael. Others called me brave, and a few accused me of ruining my own daughter's life. I closed the laptop without saying a word. Teresa approached and put a hand on my arm. Don't read anything else, old man. Let them talk all they want. The problem is that they don't just talk anymore. Now they opine on a story they don't even understand. We remained in silence, listening to the murmur of the cars passing by the avenue. Outside, the city remained awake, indifferent. Inside the room, everything was heavy. I turned off the television. In the dark screen, my tired face was reflected with the sunken eyes of someone who has seen too much. That night, I understood that the scandal was not only on the news, but inside me a storm that didn't go out, even though the case was already in the hands of justice. And while the city slept, I knew that the true trial had not yet begun. Dawn arrived with a grayish tone, one of those that doesn't announce a storm, but neither calm. At 6:30, while I was pouring my first coffee, the phone vibrated on the table. It was Jessica. The experts came, she said bluntly. They have the first lab results." Her voice sounded contained, but I perceived in it a nuance of relief. I dressed without delay, kept the folder with my documents, and went down to the lobby. Teresa looked at me from the bed, still in her robe. "Are you going out again?" "Yes, love. Today we will know the scientific truth." The morning air smelled of gasoline and humidity when I got into the taxi. The traffic towards the station was slow, and every red light seemed to lengthen the wait. In the forensic laboratory, the environment was white, almost aseptic. Everything smelled of alcohol and metal. A technician in a gray coat greeted me and asked me to follow him. On a table on a steel tray were 3 sealed envelopes and a folder with official stamps. "These are the preliminary results, Mr. Richard," he said, opening the file. In the sheets I could read medical terms I barely understood. Traces of unidentified alkaloid possible compound oleander. "That was in my blood?" I asked. "In low concentration, yes," answered the technician. "We also found it inside the wine bottle and in the residues of a pill from your medication box." Jessica, who was recording everything with her phone, intervened. "Can you confirm that they are not substances that are produced naturally?" "Correct. They were added manually." Detective Miller entered at that moment with his folder under his arm. "It is enough to strengthen the accusation. We need to determine the origin of the compound." I signed the papers. My signature, clumsy, trembled a little. The technician handed me a certified copy for the judicial file. At noon, while Jessica spoke with the DA's office, Miller received a call. I watched him walk away towards the window. When he hung up, he approached us. "We have checked Michael's phone. The call he made the day of the arrest was to an anonymous number. He identified himself only as supplier. In the log it says, 'Order product to induce deep sleep.'" Jessica frowned. "Can you trace the origin?" "We are on it," answered Miller. The shipment was made from a chemical supply store on the outskirts of the industrial district. In the afternoon, they scheduled the interrogation with Michael. Jessica asked me if I wanted to be present in the first part. I hesitated a few seconds, but nodded. I wanted to look in the eyes of the one who had tried to destroy everything. The room was small, illuminated by a yellow lamp hanging over a metal table. A camera recorded from the corner. Michael was there with his wrists handcuffed, his face haggard, deep, dark circles. He didn't look like the same arrogant man who one day mocked at my table. The investigator read the charges: attempted homicide, forgery of documents, fraud. "Do you acknowledge having manipulated Mr. Richard Reynolds' medications?" asked the DA. Michael denied, at first lowering his gaze, mumbling meaningless phrases. I know it wasn't like that. I didn't know what it contained. But the pressure increased. For almost 2 hours they repeated the questions, showed him the evidence, the recordings, the images, until finally his voice broke. "I did it for Sarah. I didn't want her to suffer. I thought it would be quick, that he would just sleep." Jessica looked at me with a contained gesture. The detective noted every word. "So you admit to having changed the medications?" insisted the DA. "Yes, I changed them," he replied with a voice barely audible. "But I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to end everyone's suffering." It was a partial confession, but a confession nonetheless. He tried to disguise the crime as compassion. He said the plan was to induce a temporary deep sleep, a rest. Meaningless words to justify selfishness. The DA continued, "And the insurance policies, the bank transfers, the forged signatures." Michael remained silent. He lowered his head and looked at the floor like a child caught in a lie. After closing the session, Jessica went out to the hallway to talk to me. "It is an advance," she told me. "He has admitted the manipulation. That gives us a solid base." An agent approached and offered me the possibility of entering a few minutes to see him under supervision. I accepted. The atmosphere of the room was dense. 2 police officers watched from the door. I approached slowly. Michael looked up. He had red eyes and a broken voice. "I didn't want to kill you, sir," he said. "I just wanted to speed things up." I looked at him for a few seconds. "Then why did you put your name on everything?" I asked calmly. He didn't answer. He just lowered his head and clenched his handcuffed hands. A defense attorney entered at that moment, interrupting the silence. He requested a break in the interrogation, he said. My client is willing to collaborate if a sentence reduction is considered. Detective Miller and the DA exchanged a look. Then by radio they communicated the request. I left the room with a bitter taste in my mouth. Outside, Jessica was talking to an assistant. She told me they had found an invoice issued by a chemical store in a nearby town, digitally signed by Michael. In the delivery address appeared his home address. There is no longer doubt, said Jessica. Everything points to him. While we walked down the hall, Miller caught up with us. We will keep him isolated, he informed us. He tried to communicate with his wife, but the message was intercepted. At dusk, Jessica handed me a folder with the names of the witnesses we had to summon for the preliminary hearing. Charlie, the technician who repaired my phone, Dr. Evan Steve from the bank, and the manager of the chemical store. I called Charlie from the lobby of the building. He answered me with a firm voice. Count on me, Mr. Richard. I will go tomorrow morning. Dr. Evans also confirmed his attendance. His tone was grave, as if he shared my exhaustion. Before leaving, Miller entered the office where Michael remained in custody. We saw him from afar, sitting on the iron bed with a lost look. At one point, they lent him a supervised phone. We heard him murmur, "Forgive me, Sarah." His voice was barely a thread, a trace of guilt, or perhaps fear. Jessica took my arm when we left the building. "Don't be confident," she told me. He could try to retract, but today we took an important step. That night, back at the hotel, Teresa was waiting for me with a cup of hot tea. On the table was a printed copy of the forensic report. I sat in front of her. The paper trembled between my fingers. "And now?" she asked. "Now begins the hardest part," I replied. "The judicial part." I kept the documents in the briefcase and closed the zipper carefully, as if I were sealing a piece of my life. At 10:30, an email arrived from a national newspaper requesting the rights to the recordings of the cameras. I forwarded it to Jessica. Minutes later, she responded from her official account. All evidence under police custody. Diffusion not authorized. I turned off the computer. In the gloom of the room, I wrote in my notebook the names of the witnesses, the phones, and the date of the hearing. Then I kept the USB with the backups in the small hotel safe. I closed the diary and stood observing the door with the hallway light filtering underneath, the distant murmur of the city mixed with the hum of the air conditioning. I knew that from that moment the case entered another stage, that of the courts, that of formal words, evidence, and crossed versions. But for me, what was at stake was not only justice, but understanding how a man I one day called son could go so far. I turned off the lamp. The silence returned thick, like a curtain that covers everything. The hallway door closed softly, and with that click, I knew the trial had already begun. The dawn of that Thursday was thick, as if the air itself sensed something. We left the hotel before 7. Teresa kept the documents and a scarf in her purse in case it got cool. On the way, no one spoke. The silence between us weighed more than the distant sirens of the city. Upon arriving at the station, Detective Miller was already waiting for us in his office reviewing some papers. "Mr. Richard," he said, "seeing me enter today, we will transfer Michael to the county jail. But we have a problem." I looked at him without understanding. "What is wrong?" "Sarah is in the house. She didn't want to come out when we notified the search warrant. She says her parents threatened her." Jessica, sitting next to the desk, turned to me. "If you go, maybe you can convince her. The police don't want to force entry." I remained silent for a few seconds. I didn't know if I had the strength to return to that place, but I couldn't leave her there either. "Let's go," I said finally. Miller gave the order, and we got into an official vehicle. 2 patrol cars escorted us. We advanced down Main Street with the sirens on. People moved aside, some curious ones recorded with their phones. The journey was brief, but every corner reminded me of something: the market where we used to buy fruit, the bakery, where Sarah as a child asked for sweet bread. All that now seemed to belong to another life. Upon turning onto my street, my heart skipped a beat. In front of the house there were 2 police vans, an ambulance, and a group of neighbors crowded behind the yellow tape. An agent cleared the way for us. The detective took the megaphone and spoke with a firm voice. "Mrs. Sarah Reynolds, come out with your hands visible." For an instant there was no answer. Then a second-floor window opened suddenly. Sarah appeared there, disheveled with swollen eyes from crying. "I didn't do anything to them," she shouted. "Let me talk to my dad." Miller looked at me and nodded. "Try it yourself." I approached slowly to the gate with my hands in sight. "Sarah, daughter, it is me. Open the door. No one is going to hurt you." For a few seconds I heard nothing, just the buzzing of helicopters flying overhead in the distance. Then I heard the sound of the bolt. The door opened slightly. The agents moved quickly. They entered, showed the search warrant, and secured the zone. Teresa stayed outside with me. Jessica took notes without taking her eyes off the entrance. Barely a few minutes passed when a young officer approached Miller and whispered something in his ear. The detective frowned. "There is another person inside," he said, and drew his weapon. They advanced down the hall to the kitchen. I followed him from a certain distance, and there in the gloom was him, Michael. Sitting at the table with a bandaged hand and a lost look, he looked like a ghost. On the table was an open bottle of wine and a half-full glass. The detective approached. "Get up slowly." Michael obeyed without saying a word. One of the agents checked his pockets. They found my set of keys and a small knife. They also took his phone. Miller asked him what he was doing there. He replied with a dull voice, "I just wanted to talk to her before leaving." Sarah appeared behind, crying. "Michael, please don't say anything else," she shouted. The detective raised his hand for the agents to separate her. 2 police officers held her gently and took her to the garden. They handcuffed Michael again. He didn't put up resistance. Meanwhile, the technicians entered with gloves and cameras photographing every corner. I walked among them, looking at my own house turned into a crime scene. The drawers were open, the family portraits thrown on the floor, a broken chair in the hallway, the smell of wine and dust mixed with that of fear. I sat in one of the kitchen chairs, my hands resting on the table. I looked at the dry blood stain on Michael's bandage and asked, "What happened to his hand?" Miller answered without looking at me. "He tried to break a window when we arrived. Maybe he wanted to escape." Jessica, with her cell phone, photographed the details. The glass, the bottle, the marks on the wood. She noted every hour, every gesture. In the patio, Sarah cried, while 2 police officers took her statement. Her voice was lost between sobs. "I didn't know he was here," she repeated over and over again. The neighbors watched from the sidewalks. Some recorded with their phones, others whispered among themselves. I could hear fragments. "He was a good boy. The millionaire father-in-law. What a shame for the family." Miller indicated that we should leave. Before doing so, an agent placed an official seal on the main door, Under Investigation District Attorney's Office. The sound of the adhesive tearing the paint hurt me more than any word. Upon getting into the car, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw Michael inside the patrol car, his head down. In the vehicle behind Sarah went alone, her face covered by her hands. 2 destinies that I once wanted to unite now traveled in opposite directions. During the journey, no one spoke. Teresa looked out the window, and I, with my eyes fixed on the road, repeated to myself that that was no longer my home. Back at the station, Jessica gathered us in a small room. "Tomorrow will be the initial hearing," she said, turning pages of a file. "You can declare if you wish, but it is not mandatory." "I will be there," I replied without hesitation. "I want to hear everything." Miller looked at me with a mixture of respect and compassion. "I understand, Mr. Richard, but prepare yourself. It is going to be long." When we left, the sun began to hide behind the buildings. The lights of the patrol cars reflected in the puddles of the parking lot. On the way to the hotel, Teresa broke the silence. "Do you think Sarah knew something?" I took time to answer. "I don't know," I said finally. "But I can't hate her. She is my daughter. It represents that I just don't know who we are anymore." That night in the hotel room, the wind beat against the windows. I put the documents on the table, the forensic reports, the photos, the statements. Everything formed a timeline of pain. Teresa turned on the bedside lamp. "You should try to sleep," she told me. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see that house and the two of them inside as if time had frozen. The clock marked 11. I heard the rhythmic, constant ticking as if measuring not seconds, but the distance between what was my life and what remains of it. I got up, looked out the window. The city was still awake, taxis, passing neon lights, distant voices. I turned off the light and returned to bed. Teresa was already asleep. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I felt afraid to dream. At 8 in the morning, the city sky was covered by a fine mist that seemed to stick to the skin. Teresa and I got out of the taxi in front of the courthouse. The stairs were already full of journalists' cameras, flashes that cut the air like lightning. An agent approached us and checked the accreditations. "Declarant or victim?" he asked with a mechanical tone. "Victim," I replied. They let us pass. Inside the corridors smelled of paper and disinfectant. We walked in silence, only footsteps, and the echo of closing doors were heard. At the end of the corridor, I saw Michael and Sarah entering through different accesses. He was escorted by 2 agents, handcuffed with his head down. She was held by the arm by a policewoman trying to prevent her from tripping. The flashes kept firing from the door. We entered the room. It was small, without public. There was only Jessica, the DA, the 2 defense lawyers, Teresa, and me. In the center, the judge, a man of about 60 with a tired face. Michael sat across from me, dressed in a gray uniform. He had messy hair, handcuffed hands, and red eyes. For a moment, looking at him, I remembered the family meals, the birthday toasts, his laughter at the table. And I felt a pang in my chest, like a face decomposes when guilt inhabits it. The judge tapped the gavel gently. "The initial hearing of case number 24625 opens," he said. "Mr. Reynolds, do you wish to declare?" Michael looked up barely an instant. "Yes," he whispered. The judge invited him to stand up. I also stood up. "I just want to know why," I said without raising my voice. "Not for the money, nor for the insurance, nor for the house. Just why do it like this?" Silence filled the room. Michael lowered his eyes, took a deep breath, and replied almost in a whisper, "Because I never felt enough. I was always the son-in-law, never the son." The phrase remained floating in the air like an echo that hurt. No one spoke, not even the judge. Jessica looked at me with discreet concern, but I just nodded in silence. There was nothing more to ask. The judge resumed the session. "Let's proceed with the presentation of evidence," he ordered. The DA stood up and began to enumerate them with precision. Exhibit number 1, printed copy of the messages from the Plan B archive. Exhibit number 2, video, obtained from the camera installed in the victim's kitchen. Exhibit number 3, toxicology report, confirming presence of the oleander compound. Exhibit number 4, statements from Dr. Evans and the technician Charlie. The defense attorney asked to intervene. "Honorable members of the court, the compound found is not a deadly poison. Its effect, according to our expert, induces a state of deep sleep, not death." "My client had no intention to kill," the DA replied with a firm voice. "The forensic report is clear. At that concentration, the compound causes respiratory arrest in less than 10 minutes. The judge nodded. Sarah, from her seat at the back, broke into tears. "I didn't know anything, I swear," she shouted. "I didn't know anything." The judge banged the gavel. "Order in the court." Teresa squeezed my hand. I kept looking straight ahead, motionless. Every word spoken sounded like a bell toll, marking the end of something that had begun much earlier, perhaps the day I decided to trust that boy. After 2 hours of deliberation, the judge dictated the provisional resolution. The court finds sufficient elements to process Michael Reynolds for the crimes of aggravated attempted homicide and forgery of documents. Preventive prison is ordered while the investigation continues. The sound of handcuffs closing resonated throughout the room. Michael stood up with difficulty. Before being taken away, he turned to me. "Forgive me, sir," he said in a low voice. I didn't answer, not because I didn't have words, but because there was nothing left to say. Jessica approached and handed me a copy of the document with the judicial seal. "This is just the beginning," she said. But justice will be done, I promise you. We went out to the hallway. The journalist waited outside, but the police opened a path for us to leave without answering questions. The rest of the day was slow. We returned home for the first time since it all began. The police seal had been removed. I opened the door with the key they returned to me at the station. Inside, it smelled of dust and dampness. The house seemed smaller. Every corner had the stillness of a place where no one waits for anyone anymore. Teresa opened the windows and the fresh air entered, dragging with it a dry leaf. On the dining room wall, a photo frame was broken. I approached. It was Sarah's wedding photo. I had taken it. Both were smiling. Teresa picked up the pieces of glass and put them on the table. "It doesn't deserve to be like this," she murmured. I didn't answer. I went to the patio where the bougainvilleas were still alive, although dust covered their petals. I turned on the hose and began to water them. The water formed small streams in the earth, the sun reflected in the drops. For a moment I felt that time was moving again. Jessica arrived in the afternoon with her briefcase full of folders. "Here are the original copies of the files," she said, handing me a closed envelope. "Keep them. Don't talk to anyone else until the court cites you again." I nodded. "Thank you for everything, counselor." "Don't thank me. Just take care of your peace, Mr. Richard. The rest will come by itself." After she left, I stayed alone in the workshop. I opened the drawer where I kept the wooden frame I had made for Sarah. I ran my fingers along the smooth edges, still unvarnished. I had started carving it before everything exploded. I was going to make a gift for her anniversary. I took out my notebook and wrote slowly, as if every word weighed. "Sometimes the most dangerous enemy doesn't wear a mask. He wears your last name." I closed the notebook and kept it along with the documents. Night fell slowly. Teresa went to bed early, exhausted. I prepared a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the car lights passing on the avenue. In the distance, the wail of a patrol car could be heard. The silence inside the house was thick, almost solid. In the reflection of the glass, I saw my aged face, the dark circles, the new wrinkles that had appeared in a few weeks. I thought about Sarah, not the adult woman, but the girl who ran through the patio, with dirt-stained hands, who laughed hiding behind the lemon tree. At what moment did I lose her? At what moment did we stop being a family? The dining room clock marked 11:59. I got up, turned off the workshop light, and walked towards the bedroom. In the hallway before closing the door, I looked one last time towards the back of the house. Everything was in its place, but nothing was the same. I whispered to myself, almost voicelessly, "It is over." But the silence of this house weighs more than the guilt. I turned off the lamp. The darkness wrapped me with a strange peace, warm and cold at the same time. The ticking of the clock was the last thing I heard before sleeping. And so without words, without witnesses, I closed the longest and most painful chapter of my life. After everything I lived, I understood that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers, but sometimes from those who shared your table and your trust. I learned that silence can save your life, and that the truth, although it hurts, always ends up coming to light. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you forgive your family, or would you simply walk away forever? I would love to read your thoughts in the comments, your experiences, your stories. Because in the end, we all carry scars that are not seen, but that teach us not to lose faith. God bless you, and may the light never be missing in your homes.